There are some truths in life that must be carried with wisdom, not because they are shameful, but because they are powerful. Power is not just in what you speak, it's in what you choose to hold back. In a world that constantly encourages us to share everything, to put every detail of our lives out there for display, it takes strength, discipline, and divine wisdom to know what should remain between you and God. Not everything sacred should be spoken. There are certain things, deep things, that lose their value the moment they're exposed to people who were never meant to carry them. Your vision, your next step, your pain, your sacrifice, your prayer life, these are not for everyone. They are for the secret place. They are between you and the one who sees in secret and rewards in the open. Sometimes silence is your shield. The enemy cannot attack what he cannot detect. People cannot twist what they do not know. When you speak too soon, you give your dreams over to the doubters, your struggles over to the mockers, and your anointing over to those who don't understand it. But when you walk in silence, covered in grace, every step you take is guided, protected, and purposeful. The most dangerous thing you can do is expose your heart to people who aren't assigned to protect it. Don't reveal your plans to those who haven't earned your trust. Don't reveal your pain to those who will use it as a weapon. Don't reveal your giving spirit to those who mistake it for weakness. Protect your peace, protect your progress, protect the process God has you in. This isn't about fear, this is about focus. When God begins to elevate you, not everyone will celebrate. Some will question, some will criticize, some will try to pull you back into the box they're comfortable seeing you in. But you were never called to live in a box. You were called to rise, to transform, to walk in the authority given to you through Christ. So be wise, speak with purpose, move with intent. There is power in your privacy. There is growth in your silence. And there is breakthrough waiting for you, not because you shouted about your plans, but because you trusted the process in the quiet, knowing that the one who sees your sacrifice in the dark will bring your reward into the light. Let them wonder, let them assume, let them watch, but you keep walking, you keep praying, you keep building, because when God reveals what He's been doing in you, it won't be a whisper, it will be a declaration.
And the world will know it wasn't by chance, it was by purpose, by discipline, by faith, and by silence. There are moments in life when silence is not only golden, it's sacred.
In a culture that constantly encourages us to express, expose, and explain, there is something deeply powerful about choosing to protect what God is doing inside of you, not out of fear, not because you're unsure, but because you understand the weight of what's growing. You understand that what's forming in your spirit is not ready for the world's inspection. You know that some things lose their strength the moment they're spoken too soon. Some things are only anointed in the secret place, and if you drag them into the spotlight too early, they wither, not because they were weak, but because the light of exposure wasn't meant for them yet. There is a holiness to privacy that our generation has forgotten. Social media has taught us to document every step, share every thought, upload every emotion. But heaven doesn't operate on that system. Heaven develops leaders in caves, in deserts, in the middle of nowhere, when no one is watching, when no one is clapping, when no one is validating you, because that's where character is forged. That's where obedience is tested. That's where purity is refined. When God starts something in you, when He places a vision in your heart, a shift in your soul, a new direction in your spirit, He doesn't ask for an announcement. He asks for stewardship. He doesn't ask you to explain it. He asks you to carry it, to protect it, to trust Him enough to let it mature without the validation of people. When you speak too soon about what God is doing, you place something eternal into a temporary context. You give divine instruction to people who weren't in the room when it was spoken.
You invite opinions into a space where only obedience belongs, and opinions, especially from those not walking in the Spirit, can be dangerous.
They can distract you, discourage you, lead you to doubt what you once knew clearly. You begin to second, guess yourself, not because God has changed the assignment, but because you gave the blueprint to someone who doesn't speak the same spiritual language. They don't know the burden, they don't know the cost, they don't know the late nights of prayer, the tears, the fasting, the faith it took to simply say yes. All they see is the outside, but what God gave you, He gave for your spirit, not for their approval. There's a divine discipline in holding back, not because you're hiding, but because you're honoring what is holy. The Bible says, "Do not cast your pearls before swine." That isn't a judgment on others. It's a commandment for your discernment. Not everyone is qualified to handle your treasure. Not everyone will respect the depth of your calling. Some people will listen only to twist it. Others will hear only to compete with it. Still others will pretend to support you, but carry a heart full of envy. That's why silence becomes your protection. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to announce anything. What God begins in the quiet, He knows how to reveal in power, and when He reveals it, no one can deny it. Silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's strength under control. It's the ability to walk in confidence, not because others understand your journey, but because you trust the one who authored it. You trust that if He called you, He will sustain you. If He spoke it, He will fulfill it. You don't need a platform to prove it. You don't need a post to promote it. You just need to walk in faith, in obedience, in reverence. Some of the most anointed seasons of your life will be the ones no one claps for. No one sees, no one acknowledges, and yet those are the seasons that shape you, that make you, that prepare you for what's ahead. There is also healing in privacy. When you're going through something painful, something that shook you to the core, there's a temptation to reach out, to vent, to explain. But not everyone needs to know what broke you. Not everyone deserves access to that part of your story. There is healing that comes from resting in God's presence, not the presence of people. There are wounds that only He understands. There are battles you were never meant to explain. And when you take those wounds into the wrong hands, they don't bring healing. They reopen. They infect. They become fuel for gossip, not prayer. But when you stay in the secret place, when you take your brokenness to the feet of Jesus instead of the judgment of men, He heals you in a way no words ever could. You don't have to share everything to be authentic. Authenticity isn't oversharing, it's alignment. It's living in agreement with your assignment, even when others don't see it, even when they misread your silence, even when they assume your stillness is confusion. They don't know what's happening behind the scenes. They don't know the deep work being done in your soul. That's okay. Let them wonder. Let them misread. Because when the time comes and God brings you forward, it will be undeniable. Not because you announced it, but because He did. And when He does, the same people who questioned your silence will witness your elevation. The same ones who misunderstood your restraint will watch your release. But by then, you won't even need their validation, because the reward won't be in their applause. It will be in knowing that you trusted the process. You honored the sacred, you protected what was holy, and in that obedience, you positioned yourself for a blessing no man could give, and no man could take away. Some things were never meant for the ears of those who lack the spiritual depth to understand them. When you speak too soon, when you open your heart too wide to people who aren't prepared, qualified, or assigned to carry it, you invite misunderstanding. You invite misinterpretation. You give away a part of yourself that was meant to remain protected, covered, and guarded. There is a reason the wise are slow to speak.
There is a reason Scripture says, "A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back." That restraint isn't fear, it's discernment.
There's power in knowing that everything that crosses your mind doesn't need to cross your lips. Too often, we confuse openness with strength. We think if we're transparent about everything with everyone, it shows maturity. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it reveals a lack of discipline, because maturity is not just about being real, it's about knowing when to be real, with whom, and how much. Just because someone asks a question doesn't mean they deserve the answer. Just because they're close to you doesn't mean they've earned access to the deepest parts of you. And just because they listen doesn't mean they understand. People see through filters shaped by their own pain, jealousy, insecurity, past, and limited perspective. They don't hear what you say, they hear what they think you mean. They don't always see what you're doing. They interpret it based on their own narrative. So, when you share your dreams, your struggles, your plans, or your testimony with people who are not spiritually aligned with you, you give them power to distort it. You give them ammunition, sometimes unknowingly, to speak against what they cannot comprehend. There is something deeply dangerous about exposing your process too early. When God is working in your life, shaping something new in you, it's often still fragile. Just like a plant breaking through the soil, it needs protection from the elements. Too much exposure, too much pressure, too many eyes can stop it from growing properly. And when you share too much, too soon, you allow others to speak over what is still forming. Words have power. A careless word, even spoken without malice, can introduce doubt, fear, or insecurity into something God intended to grow in pure faith. Imagine Joseph in the Bible, who shared his dream with his brothers. The dream was real, the dream was from God, but the people he shared it with were not ready to receive it. They didn't understand it, and because of that, they hated him, they betrayed him. They tried to destroy the very thing God had placed inside him. The dream didn't die, but the journey got longer, more painful, more isolated, not because Joseph was wrong about what God showed him, but because he shared it with people whose hearts were not right. That lesson still applies. Not everyone in your life is safe. Not everyone clapping for you is cheering for you. Some people get close just to know what you're doing. Some people pretend to care just to stay informed. Some people are so broken inside that anything you say, anything you build, anything you become becomes a threat to their sense of self-worth. It's not your job to fix them, but it is your responsibility to protect yourself, to protect what God is doing in you, to protect the vision, the growth, the healing, and the purpose He has placed in your hands. Sometimes the people closest to you are the most dangerous because you trust them the most. You assume proximity equals loyalty, but that's not always true. Judas sat at the same table as Jesus, he broke bread with him, he shared in the ministry, and yet he was the one who betrayed him, not because Jesus was weak, but because Judas had a role in the story that required exposure. Some people in your life have that same assignment, not to bless you, but to expose what you've left unguarded. When you share too openly, you invite scrutiny into places that were meant to remain sacred. You open the door to questions that plant seeds of doubt. You allow the enemy to use other people's mouths to echo your own insecurities back to you. You hear them say it, and you start believing it. You begin wondering if maybe they're right. Maybe it won't work. Maybe you're not enough. Maybe you should give up. And all of a sudden, the faith you once had begins to shrink. Not because God changed His mind, but because you handed someone else your confidence, and they didn't know how to handle it. Even your testimony, one of the most powerful things you possess, requires wisdom. Not everyone deserves to know how far you've come. Not everyone is capable of hearing what you've survived. Some people will use your past against you. Others will belittle your transformation because they don't believe in the power of God to change someone. They will reduce your journey to a rumor, your deliverance to a debate. So instead of celebrating what God has done, you find yourself defending it, and that was never your assignment. You weren't called to convince anyone of your growth. You were called to live it, to walk it, to bear the fruit of it, not argue for it. The enemy thrives on access. He doesn't need to destroy you directly. He just needs enough information to whisper through the wrong people. He just needs a sliver of vulnerability, a moment of unguarded speech, a bit of spiritual leakage to start planting confusion. And that's why silence isn't just emotional maturity, it's spiritual warfare. It's how you protect your peace, how you guard your anointing, how you stay focused on the assignment without getting caught in unnecessary battles. There is nothing weak about holding your tongue. There is nothing passive about staying quiet. It is one of the strongest, most intentional things you can do in a world obsessed with noise. In fact, silence is often the mark of someone who walks closely with God, someone who doesn't need to prove themselves, someone who understands that divine timing is more important than human attention, someone who is more interested in God's validation than man's applause. So choose your listeners carefully. Choose your confessions wisely. Choose your silence prayerfully, because once something leaves your mouth, you can't take it back. Once something is exposed, you can't undo the damage it might cause in the wrong hands. Guard your heart. Guard your calling. Guard your voice. And trust that God sees, knows, and rewards what you do in secret, without needing an audience to understand it. There is a kind of strength that never makes noise, a kind of protection that doesn't come from fences or walls, but from wisdom, the wisdom to remain quiet. Silence is your shield. It is one of the most underestimated weapons you possess in a world that rewards noise, attention, and exposure. But when you understand the spiritual value of silence, you begin to recognize it not as a lack of confidence, but as the presence of self-control and divine insight. The enemy cannot attack what he cannot detect. People cannot destroy what they do not see. And sometimes, the greatest mistake we make is giving too much access to our thoughts, our movements, our emotions, and our intentions. There are conversations that were never meant to be had outside of your prayer life. There are thoughts that were only meant to be expressed before God. There are decisions that should be carried out with obedience, not with announcements. Every time you speak, you give people a key into your life, your mind, your spiritual journey. And not everyone knows how to handle that responsibility. Some use those keys to understand you. Others use them to manipulate you. Still others will use them to monitor you, not for the purpose of support, but for control. So your silence at times is not just wise, it's protective. In silence there is clarity. In stillness there is strength. When you resist the urge to explain everything, to share everything, to defend everything, you free yourself from unnecessary battles. You stop handing people ammunition. You stop giving them power over your peace. When you remain quiet, you retain control. You determine what gets out. You decide what parts of you remain sacred, and that is not secrecy. That is strategy. Some things are between you and God. Some lessons are not yet meant to be taught. They are still being lived. And when you learn to walk silently in the middle of your transformation, you become untouchable, not because you're invincible, but because you're hidden. When you make a decision to walk in purpose, to step into your assignment, or to break free from patterns and people that once held you back, you don't need to tell the world. You just need to move quietly, consistently, with intention. Too often we sabotage our own progress by talking about it too soon. We open the door for doubts, opinions, and criticism that would never have reached us had we simply stayed silent and kept walking. Every spoken word is a doorway, and not all doors are safe. Sometimes, by speaking, you let the wrong spirits in spirits of confusion, pride, fear, and comparison. But silence locks the door. It keeps you focused. It keeps you grounded. Many people never reach the fullness of their purpose because they spend too much time trying to prove they are on the right path. They explain their dreams. They defend their calling. They announce their progress. And in doing so, they distract themselves from the actual work. They begin to perform for approval instead of walking in obedience. But when you stop explaining and start executing, everything changes. Your focus sharpens, your spiritual ears open, you begin to hear what really matters, the still small voice that leads you, rather than the loud voices that judge you. In silence, you begin to realize that most of the noise around you is irrelevant. Most of the people you're trying to convince weren't listening with the intention to understand. They were listening with the intention to critique. But if they don't have the Spirit of God inside them, they were never equipped to understand you in the first place. Silence also protects your relationships. When you're constantly talking about your issues, your struggles, your offenses, you open the door to bitterness and division. You begin to shape someone else's opinion based on your moment of emotion. And later, when you've healed, when you've moved on, when you've forgiven, they still carry what you said. They still remember the details you shared in anger, in sorrow, in vulnerability. So you move forward, but they stay stuck in your past. You've grown, but they're holding on to what you were. That's why silence in relationships can be a shield, not only for you, but for others. It gives you time to process before you speak, time to pray before you vent, time to gain perspective before you share your perspective. There is also a protection that comes when you choose not to reveal your strategies. When God gives you an idea, a vision, a plan, it's not always for public knowledge. Sometimes it's a blueprint meant to be built in the dark, because the moment you reveal the plan, you allow others to interfere. Some will try to copy it. Others will try to compete with it. Some will question it until you start questioning yourself. But when you move in silence, you eliminate the noise, you eliminate the confusion. You stay in alignment with the original instruction God gave you, uncorrupted by the feedback of those who were never called to walk your path. Even Jesus at times moved in silence. He didn't always explain his miracles. He didn't always defend himself against accusations. He understood the power of timing. He understood the assignment didn't require public approval. It required divine obedience. He healed in silence. He withdrew to pray. He walked into purpose with authority, not by yelling, but by knowing who he was and who sent him. That same spirit lives in you. The ability to walk silently, to carry power without having to prove it, to live purposefully without broadcasting every step. That is the kind of power that hell fears, because it cannot track what it cannot see. The enemy watches patterns, he listens to words, he studies reactions. But when you become still, when you guard your speech, when you walk under the covering of silence, he is confused. He can't predict your next move. He can't interrupt your process. He is forced to watch, powerless, as God moves through you without warning. You don't need to shout your progress. You don't need to defend your silence. You don't need to explain why you're distant, focused, or unavailable. Those who are spiritually aligned with you will understand your silence. They will sense the shift. They will know that you're in a season where you're not avoiding people. You're honoring the process. You're not being secretive. You're being selective. You're not lost. You're hidden in purpose, hidden in growth, hidden in the grace of a God who does his best work in quiet places. When you stop explaining and start walking, people will see the fruit. They'll see the growth.
They'll witness the transformation, not because you told them about it, but because you lived it. The proof will be undeniable, and the best part, you'll have arrived without drama, without distraction, without noise. Just purpose, just presence, just peace, because you used your silence as a shield and it guarded everything that mattered most. Not everyone clapping for you is genuinely happy for you. Not everyone smiling in your face has your best interest at heart. One of the hardest lessons to accept on the journey of growth is that jealousy often hides behind praise, and envy wears the mask of admiration. Sometimes the people you believe are cheering for you are quietly competing with you. They don't want you to fail outright, but they don't want you to rise too high either. They want you to grow, but only within the limits of what makes them comfortable. The moment your light starts shining brighter than theirs, the applause softens, the tone shifts, and the smiles become strained. And if you've already handed these people too much of your heart, too much of your story, too much of your truth, then you've given them the very weapons they'll use to cut you down. There's a deep danger in confiding in people whose spirits are not free from comparison. If a person's identity is rooted in validation or competition, they can't truly celebrate your wins because your elevation feels like their demotion. And so, instead of encouraging you, they quietly begin to resent you. They study you, they analyze you, they question your motives not because you've done anything wrong, but because your growth confronts their stagnation. And when people are unwilling to confront their own lack of progress, they often attack the progress they see in others. That's why discernment is critical. Not everyone deserves access to your journey. Jealousy doesn't always look obvious. Sometimes it hides in compliments with sharp edges, phrases like "must be nice," or "you've changed," or "don't forget where you came from," are often spoken with a smile, but carry undertones of bitterness. These statements aren't rooted in love. They're rooted in discomfort. Discomfort with your discipline, discomfort with your vision, discomfort with your favor. But you're not responsible for making other people feel comfortable with your calling. You're not obligated to shrink to fit someone else's insecurity. What you are responsible for is guarding your space, guarding your voice, and guarding your spirit from the slow, subtle sabotage that can come from even the most familiar faces. Sometimes it's not strangers who want to see you fall. It's the people you grew up with. The ones who knew you before the glow up. The ones who remember your mistakes and try to trap you in them, because if you outgrow your past, then they have to face their own decision to stay in it. Growth demands change, and change threatens those who are addicted to the familiar. When you elevate, you force people to look at themselves, and when they don't like what they see, they'll try to pull you back to their level, not because you belong there, but because it justifies their refusal to rise. This is why it's so dangerous to reveal too much to the wrong people. Some will pretend to support you just to stay close enough to see what you're doing. They'll gather information not to celebrate you, but to find weak spots. To gossip, to create division, to feed their ego by knowing your next move before the world does. These are the people who smile in your face but question your motives behind closed doors. They'll say, "I'm just worried about you," when really they're unsettled by how well you're doing. And the moment things get tough, the moment you face a challenge or stumble, they'll be the first to say, "I knew it." Not because they truly knew it, but because they hoped for it. Because your failure validates their smallness. You have to learn to protect yourself from passive-aggressive sabotage, from people who won't say they're against you, but never really act like they're for you either. People who never clap when you win, but are quick to analyze you when you lose. People who only show up when it benefits them. When you've given people like this access to your personal battles, your dreams, your secrets, you've unintentionally invited doubt, fear,
and negativity into sacred spaces. And once those things take root, they begin to affect your confidence, your clarity, your momentum. There's a unique pain in discovering that someone you trusted is secretly rooting against you. It hurts because betrayal never comes from an enemy. It comes from those close enough to touch what's vulnerable. That's why spiritual maturity includes discernment. The ability to sense not just what someone says, but what their spirit carries. To feel when something is off, even if their words sound right. And when you sense it, you don't owe them confrontation. You don't owe them an explanation. You owe yourself distance. You owe your calling protection. You owe your peace priority. You're not obligated to let everyone in. Just because they've been around doesn't mean they should have a front row seat to what God is doing in your life now. Access is a privilege. Trust is a gift. And once someone shows you they can't handle your honesty, your vulnerability, your growth, or your calling, believe them. Set boundaries, not out of anger, but out of wisdom, because your destiny is too precious to be tangled in petty competition and quiet envy. You've worked too hard, prayed too long, and grown too far to let the wrong spirit near the next season of your life. Even Jesus was selective. He had 12 disciples, but only 3 went with him to certain places. And there were moments, intense, divine moments, where even those 3 were asked to wait outside, not because they were evil, but because the moment required something sacred, something private. That's the level of discernment you need, knowing who belongs in the room, who can be trusted with your tears, who can hold your vision without trying to remake it in their image, who can celebrate you without secretly comparing themselves to you. And when you find those people, treasure them, but for everyone else, love them from a distance. What you protect grows, what you keep sacred flourishes, and what you hide from the wrong eyes is safe from the wrong motives. The world doesn't need to know every detail of your journey, and the people around you don't need to be informed of every dream, plan, or struggle, especially not those whose hearts are quietly competing with you. Move in silence, let your fruit speak, let your consistency silence the critics, let your peace be the proof, because in the end, your life will reflect what you protected, and what you released will reveal who could be trusted. There are certain wounds that don't need to be shared with everyone. Not every scar deserves an audience. Not every struggle is meant to be spoken out loud. Pain is sacred. It is not just an emotional state. It's a deeply spiritual space where transformation, revelation, and renewal begin to take root. And when you casually share your pain with those who haven't earned your trust, or worse, those who lack the emotional and spiritual maturity to handle it, you run the risk of having your deepest experiences reduced to gossip, judgment, or entertainment. People will hear your story but not your heart. They will remember the drama but forget the lesson. That's why one of the greatest acts of wisdom you can exercise is choosing silence when the world tempts you to speak about your suffering. Pain in many ways is holy. It's where God speaks the loudest. It's where you are the most honest with yourself. Pain is often where purpose is born. When you go through hardship, whether it's loss, betrayal, heartbreak, failure, or any other dark season, it isn't just about surviving it. It's about being transformed through it. But that process is deeply personal. It requires privacy. It requires time. And most importantly, it requires protection. Because the moment you speak about your pain too soon, especially to people who haven't shown the capacity to carry it with care, you expose something sacred to contamination. There's something that happens when you hand your wounds to the wrong people. They don't heal you, they handle you. They interpret your pain through their own brokenness. They question your emotions, minimize your experience, or worse, use your vulnerability against you. And suddenly, you begin to feel ashamed for feeling. You begin to second guess your reactions, you start to suppress your voice, not because your story wasn't valid, but because it was mishandled by someone unqualified to hear it. Not everyone deserves access to your broken moments. Not everyone is equipped to walk with you through the valley. Some people only know how to love you when you're whole. But the ones who can sit with you in silence, pray for you without needing details, and respect your process without demanding explanations, those are the ones who deserve access to your pain. Sometimes the worst damage isn't caused by the pain itself. It's caused by the reactions you receive when you try to express it. That's why discernment is necessary. You can't be desperate for connection and careless with discretion. People love to hear stories of struggle, but not everyone loves you in the middle of yours. Some want to know the mess without offering mercy. They want the details without offering grace. And in the end, they don't help you. They expose you. That's why your healing cannot be public property. Your processing cannot be performed on a stage. There is a time to speak, but there is also a time to remain silent and let the work happen in private. There's also the trap of oversharing in the name of transparency. In a culture that encourages us to be real and speak our truth, we often forget that truth still needs timing. You might be telling the truth, but are you telling it in the right season? To the right people with the right heart, transparency without discretion is vulnerability without protection. It leaves you open, raw, and often misunderstood. You don't have to bleed in public to prove that you're human. You don't have to explain your tears to validate your experience. And you certainly don't have to turn your pain into content for people who are simply curious but not compassionate. Healing is sacred. It's messy, it's not linear. It requires grace, patience, and a safe space, something the world often cannot offer. Sometimes God will intentionally isolate you during your healing season, not to punish you, but to protect what He's building inside you. When you try to involve everyone in your pain, you delay the healing that comes from solitude. You need time to hear your own voice, time to hear God's voice, time to confront the layers of your suffering without the noise of opinions, advice, or expectations. Because what you're going through isn't just about what happened to you. It's about who you're becoming through it, and becoming requires silence. There's also a power in learning to sit with your own pain without trying to explain it to everyone. When you stop seeking validation from others, you create space for divine validation. You begin to understand that God doesn't waste pain. Every tear, every heartache, every setback has purpose attached to it. But that purpose is often hidden until the pain has had time to process. If you speak too soon, you might tell the wrong story. You might frame your pain through bitterness rather than healing. You might share your story before it has clarity. And what you release prematurely might be weaponized against you later. So you wait, you pray, you process, and you protect. You protect your heart from people who don't know how to handle it. You protect your emotions from environments that don't nurture healing. You protect your spirit from being drained by unnecessary exposure. Because at the end of the day, healing is holy ground, and not everyone should be invited to walk on it with you. Another danger of sharing your pain too freely is that it creates dependency. You begin to seek comfort from people more than from God. You begin to depend on human understanding rather than divine peace. And when people fail to understand you, as they often do, you're left feeling even more alone, even more broken. But when you go to God with your pain, He doesn't just understand it. He carries it, He heals it, He uses it, He speaks into it, and His response doesn't come with judgment or confusion. It comes with love, clarity, and transformation. There's also strength that grows in silence. When you carry your pain with quiet dignity, you build resilience. You learn that you don't have to collapse in every storm. You don't have to broadcast every battle. You learn to cry in prayer, not in public. You learn to fight spiritual warfare on your knees, not through complaint. And in that silence, your soul becomes stronger, your heart becomes wiser, Your spirit becomes more anchored, because you've learned how to suffer well, not with bitterness but with trust. Eventually, your pain will become a testimony. One day you will speak. One day your story will heal others, but the power of your story won't come from how loudly you told it. It will come from how deeply you lived it, from how much grace you allowed to flow through it, from how closely you walked with God while carrying it. That's where real healing comes from. And when that time comes, when the wound has become a scar, when the tears have become wisdom you'll share, not for attention, but for transformation, not to be heard, but to help, and not to stay stuck in the pain, but to reveal the power that was born from it. Until then, you guard it, you sit with it, you grow through it, in silence, in reverence, in strength. Guard your soul like sacred ground, in a world hungry for attention, desperate for validation, and quick to judge what it does not understand. Choose the path of wisdom, not noise. Every dream, every battle, every scar, every sacred truth you carry is not for public consumption. It is for divine purpose. There is power in privacy, strength in silence, and victory in discernment. When you choose to protect what matters most, your vision, your peace, your pain, your plans, your heart, you're not being secretive, you're being strategic. You're not withholding, you're preserving. You're not hiding, you're honoring the process God is taking you through. Never forget, not everyone deserves access to your spirit. Not every listener is safe, and not every hand that reaches for you is reaching to help. Move with grace, but move wisely. Speak with truth, but speak when led. Shine, but never at the cost of your peace. Because the more you grow, the more sacred your space must become. Protect it, respect it, and let your life speak louder than your words ever could.